Pi Day. Okay, so my name is Joseph Alexander Brown. Some of you may know me. I'm seeing a lot of new faces, however, in the building. I'm a professor here at Innopolis University, and tonight I want to take you on a journey through madness. And my thought when I was asked to do a talk for Pi Day is, okay, what do I know about pi? How do I kind of look at this? And I'm working mostly in kind of areas of generation of content for video games. I'm working in kind of media studies in some ways. And tonight I'm going to show you some literary criticism. And my thinking of pi, I think back to the movie Pi that happened in the 1990s. And my question is, am I going insane? Am I turning in to this gentleman here from the movie Pi by acting as a computer scientist, a mathematician, a poet, and so forth? And so welcome to a journey to my madness. And the issue here is genius and madness have a link through it. I really love this quote by Douglas Adams inside of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He was a dreamer, a thinker, a speculative philosopher, or as wife would have it, an idiot. And so I'm going to take you on a journey. We're going to start with the movie Pi from 1998. I'm going to move into supernatural numbers and the relation of numbers with the speculative and the supernatural, into kind of this Jewish numbering system connecting numbers with letters, then into Canadian poetry, and finally into published academic work inside of computer science and literary criticism that I've done. So, scary. Okay? So this is your opportunity to get off the ride now. So literary criticism is kind of weird, and I think this kind of spells it out. My hobby, sitting down with grad students and timing out how long it takes them to figure out I'm not actually an expert in their field. And so here, engineering, 48 seconds, linguists, 63 seconds, sociology, 4 minutes, literary criticisms, 8 papers, 2 books, and they haven't caught on. And this is where I am right now. They haven't caught on that I don't work in literary criticism, that I work in computer science. And to start off, let's just go through Pi, the plot of the movie, and this kind of gives the journey that I'm wondering if I'm emulating, and I'm worried. So Max Cohen, the main character, he starts out as a number theorist. He creates this massively wired computer called Euclid to predict the stock market. He suffers from neurological issues, social anxiety, cluster headaches during this time. And he comes upon a realization that he's able to be clairvoyant due to a number revealed to him by the computer, which then allows him to predict the markets. And through the course of this movie, he is getting steadily more unstable. And then Evil Inc., of course, because it's the number that predicts the markets, Evil Inc. wants to take over his invention and take over him. And he meets with a group of Orthodox Jews who tell him that actually what he's figured out is the hidden 216-digit number that represents God inside of their connection for this. And that's why he can see everything. He has found the literal, 42 of the universe. And for this ends up with him then drilling out into his head, destroys the computer, and at the end he's on a park bench and he's unable to even do basic math. And this settles him and moves through it. And mathematics is a very dangerous field. It actually has some of the highest levels of mental illness within practitioners. And given that there's a half mathematician, then there's half a crazy guy running around. So this does.
My father is a full mathematician.
So he's a fool right now.
Yeah.
So the movie looks into the ideas of kind of mental illness through this, of connections, and it's a contrast of kind of this irrational world versus clean theory and decisions. And as we all know, clean theory and decisions works very well in theory, and it fails in practice. So moving on from there, I started to look at kind of this connection of math and the supernatural, right? mystical numbers. There's lots of numbers that have these kind of connections inside of all of the great mythologies, religions, you have it. So 12 and 13 has this connection of kind of like transcendence. You have the zodiac signs, you have the 12 tribes of Israel, the European Union flag for this, number of people on a jury, that there's this kind of decisionness to it. 40, Jason and the Argonauts, Old Man in the Sea, Noah, 40 days, 40 nights. 3, Trinity, forms the first geometric figure, lucky, the charm, or wishes, like from a genie. And if we look and connect this then to what was going on within the movie of Pi, there is this sort of mystical numbering system within the Jewish folklore of the value, their letters then map to numbers. That there's this connection between a letter and a number. So you don't have to have a number system, you just have a letter system. And so this leads to you to the ability to take different words, change them into a number, and then have words equate to other words via this system. Okay? Where do we see this currently? What does this look like? Any computer scientists in the room?
Ask you.
Yeah, it's a connection between letters and numbers. Okay? So, how did I get down this whole road? Okay? So my friend Terry, he's a poet. He's currently working on his social justice and equity PhD studies at York University. Published numerous different poems. This is from one of his sites in terms of this. He also has some poetry actually published in a mathematical journal on math, like math poetry. So my friend Terry, he's a poet, and he's also a jerk. Because while I was working on my MSc, he shows me this poem here called 16 Lily Pads. And this began my realization of the 216-digit number within my own life. Looking at this from the aspects of mathematics, computer science, engineering, well, what do we see here? Okay, so we have frog. Here we have all question marks. Here we have a missing G. Here we have a missing O. Here we have a missing F. Here we have a missing R. Yeah, but it's all the different combinations of that inside of a rectangle. Yeah. And the theme of this is 16 lily pads, and we have this idea of a frog. And what do frogs do?
Sit on the lily pad.
So sit on the lily pads, right? They move through the lily pads. So this, to me, I see it as a graph. And now, if we trace the letters through this graph, there's Hamiltonian paths. This is the frog jumping through the system. Okay? This is where the madness now begins. Because I am looking at this and going, hey, if you have even a very small amount of knowledge of mathematics, science, etc., you begin to look at this poem, and you now gain meaning out of it. So I'm not having to stretch too far with the theming of the poem in order to then say this. So I can see someone putting their finger on it and tracing the F's, tracing the R's, tracing the O's, tracing the G's through this. Possible potentials. The name of this poem, again, 16 lily pads. And so we wrote a paper on this at some point. And the problem is that now people are talking about me. And so this is actually a response article written in a Finnish journal with English translation there. And you can see here, originally born as a response to the poem addressed published by these guys and Terry. So Terry is leading me down this dangerous path. Inside of this too, I also started to look into this idea of pataphysics. B.P. Nicol, the author of that poem, is part of this tradition of pataphysics. And what is pataphysics? It's defined as a branch of philosophy that deals in the imaginary realm, additional to metaphysics, or the science of imaginary solutions. This is a group of poets trying to basically mock math and science by utilizing techniques from math and science, but coming up with complete hokum, we would say. And so popularized by the French poet Alfred Jarry, wanted to mock science for its ability to classify everything. Well, you can't classify the unknown, you can't classify a unicorn, you can't classify all of these other things, but we'll try anyways and show that math, you can take the, as you were just talking about with the axioms, you can take the axioms and you can end up anywhere. This has a massive French and then later Canadian poetic following through this. And B.P. Nicol, poet, writer, worked in prose concrete poems such as 16 Lily Pads, sound poetry, and he also did computer poetry. So he is somewhat computer literate in terms of this, as a programmer. He also wrote scripts for the Care Bears, Babar, and Fraggle Rock. So very wide berth of his work. So let me show you a few of his works just to give you a sample of what is out there. Here's the complete works of B.P. Nicol. It's everything on the typewriter that he has, and it says any possible permutation of all listed elements. This is the complete works. So he is describing now all of his poetry, and in fact probably plagiarizing from everything ever made by anyone ever, in this poem. Here's another one, Probable Systems number 4, for James Joyce during his worst bummer. Faith, and we see here, he equates it to its position within the alphabet, becomes 44, becomes 8, 15, 16, and 5, hope. Okay? So it's a little alphabetical game. And you can do this with any language you want, have it put it to an ordinal value. You can do this with ASCII values. You can do this with any one where you just have the position along the alphabet. You change it into a number, you sum it, you get a number, and then you try to find another word that sums to the same number. And then the question is, are these equivalent in terms of the poetics of it? So faith equals hope is kind of cool, right? There's some beauty to that from the perspective of the meaning within the language here. And there's also this way of jumping between them now. I can now also begin to put a graph on words. I can say all of these words are equivalent and start playing around with words inside of different systems. Here's another one of his probable systems. This is probable systems 15. Anyone want to give an idea of what this is? What does this look like? Huh?
Division really.
Division. This is a long division. And this is looking at two things. One, it's saying, what is a number? This is looking at numbers as symbols. So question, is there a solution to this? I'll tell you at the end of the presentation. I'll tell you what the answer to this is. Okay. Another big famous Canadian poet in this, and that's really working currently, is Christian Book. His work, Enolia, won the Canadian Griffin Poetry Prize. And it contains entire sections that are all done with using only one vowel, kind of a restricted set. So the I chapter has only the words from the letter I. So writing is inhibiting, sitting. I sat dribbling the ink in this pigeon script. And he's currently working on the generation of a poem that can be modeled into DNA, known as the xenotext. So he's also taking aspects from biology and gluing them into poetry, and aspects from math in terms of this. Okay. Here's one of his poems. This is S-fractal. It's a self-similar series of S's, all in type-scripted S's. So it follows the rules. I don't know if it comes out very clear on the translation, but those are all the S character from a keyboard. Here's another one known as Ruby, which is the atoms that make it up, arranged in basically a Scrabble board. And this is perhaps one of my recent favorites and finds. the great order of the universe. This is all the possible ways to put together these two bricks of Lego. And down at the bottom, so getting back to your construction of the system, right? Of what's the reducible set in terms of it. And down at the bottom he has this quote from the great order of the universe. Atoms bombard the implacable void, plunging silvery raindrops, like blah, 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 blah. And then down at the bottom, forever becoming prolific universe, distinctive for its mild infinitude of forms. And then down here, this is the patent from the original Lego patent. And the last line of it, thus providing for a vast variety of combinations of the bricks for making toy structures of many different kinds and shapes. So this is talking about the molecules within the universe. This is talking about Lego and the connection in terms of these systems. This to me is both absolutely gorgeous from a standpoint of poetics, of juxtaposition of a child's toy to the universe, and it's also beautiful from the standpoint of science, mathematics, and so forth. Because we love to have this kind of idea of ourselves, of being able to understand the universe as if it's a toy. So some literary critics, this is on B.P. Nicol and the work that I showed a little bit earlier. She remarks that the best thing about reading B.P. Nicol is the impossibility of reading B.P. Nicol. Dobson points out that every claim to be able to read his poetry is unstable. She argues that trying to talk about B.P.'s personality and personal relationships limited how his work may be understood. Dobson thinks that B.P. Nicol's poetry has qualities that resists her colleagues' attempts to write traditional criticism about the man and his work, and she instead sees his poetry espousing a radical openness that she claims she can only partially understand herself. My claim is that Kid Dobson is making a long-winded argument that really says she's unqualified to actually understand the work at a constructionist level. This is a big long-winded thing that basically says, I don't know what he's doing, but that's cool. And so, looking at it mathematically, and given the fact that they are trying to mock math, they are trying to mock science, that is pataphysics. It is at its very level back to Jerry. It is a mocking of us. I'll say collective us, because I don't know the domain. So more literary critics on B.P. Nicol. So Stephen Zelkansky suggests that there are more scientific ways of understanding B.P. Nicol's poems. Says that there's an interest in imaginary science and quasi-scientific poems, pointing out that Probable System 6 plays with both the letters of algebra and the letters of English, and sees the use of math as language. Okay, so I claim again that Zelkansky does not have the tools necessary to look at the work from a constructive level, but he's at least seeing that there's some math or science inside of here. So literary criticists are going in and trying to understand this poetry without understanding the domain of which the poet is drawing these inspirations from, which is a little bit dangerous in understanding then what is the poet saying. They are mocking math. If you don't understand math, it becomes very hard to then see that it's a joke. So you can't mock what you don't understand. You have to have an enjoyment or a love for something in order to joke about it at a very high and understandable level. So pataphysics by its very nature is a mockery of science. Writers who don't understand science or mathematics, don't get the joke. So yes, there's pseudoscience involved, but in order to create a pseudoscience, you have to have some elements of science inside. So the background for many of that interest in math, but not looking at it for the sake of math, but how it manipulates data. So here, for example, we talked about hope equals faith. This is the general algorithm for solving such alpha metrics and creating all of these. And what we did is we went back and grabbed a big giant word list of all Scrabble words of size 4 and size 5. And our question became, what else could a B.P. Nicol have created other than hope equals faith? So We had ho, well, let's look at some other 5-letter words that equal to that. Space, areas, clock, brain, karma, elder. And then another 86 words with an ordinal value of 44. Or could have equated it with any of the 4-letter words of kill, zeal, seize, gems, and cook. So B.P. Nicholls' chance of finding any sort of poetically interesting relationship is actually quite high. And in fact, his work can mostly be done without the aid of a computer program in this case. He was probably trying to do this on many different words that were interesting poetically, like hope, faith. Can I equate them? Oh, look, I can. That's a poem. But I could say space is equal to gems, or I could say brain is equal to kill, using this sort of system. And you can also do it again for these sorts of systems. So now I wanted to ask, is probable systems 15, this one of the long division, solvable? And I'll answer to you that it is. But I will leave this as an exercise for you all, because the thing is, with madness and math, it's best shared with friends. So I think that brings us back full circle in terms of pi and poetry. Thank you very much.
By the way, I believe we should